Hello, and welcome to the Compassionate Men's Interview Series. Today I'm honored to be talking to Dr. James Doty. Dr. Doty defines a 21st century Renaissance man. He is a neurosurgeon, a professor and researcher at Stanford University School of Medicine, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, CCARE. Welcome, Dr. Doty, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be with you and spend some time together.
Great. You know, Dr. Doty, in addition to all those things I mentioned in the introduction, you also speak all across the country. I think you just came back from your third TEDx talk, and you're organizing a global compassion initiative. I think a lot of our viewers feel overburdened and overstressed. I think they feel like they can't fit anything else into their schedules. So my question to you is, how and why do you find time for compassion in your life?
Well, it's interesting because I certainly appreciate that comment. And I think what each of us has to do is to look into ourselves and get to a place where we appreciate that the value of connection to others is probably the most valuable thing that is actually happening in our lives. It is the thing that gives us purpose. It's the thing that gives us meaning. It actually is the thing that physiologically has the greatest effect on health. And at the end of the day, each and every one of us wants to have been able to say, I was here, I had an impact, my life had meaning, it had purpose, and perhaps for those who are left in this existence after each of us departs, those who are left can look to us and hopefully use us as a model to be how one should live their life. And I'm not trying to in any way imply that I'm perfect, that I don't have issues, that I'm somehow not a frail, fragile human being who makes mistakes and has failures. But I think that's how I look at the world. But for me, I feel very much highly motivated to spread this message, because my experience has been that, at least in the context of what I do, when I give my message, the personal message that I have, for many people, it is actually very powerful. And I've had a number of people come up and say how it's affected them or resonated with them. And it makes you feel good. And it makes me feel that this is part of my own purpose.
That's great. Yeah. That kind of segues into a question I wanted to ask you about, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I got these numbers wrong, but in the dot-com crash, you lost $70 million, and then you took a company public for $1.3 billion, of which you donated all of your shares to charity. Then you founded the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. It seems to me that something changed in your life during this period, and I was wondering if you could talk about that and how it seems you became really altruistic in this short span of time, and what happened there.
Well, I would tell you, it's not as if I was not generous or altruistic before, but certainly I would think that if you look at somebody who's lost what I think all of us would consider huge sums of money, and in fact, I was effectively bankrupt, and then to essentially, while in that position, give away tens and tens of millions of dollars when one did not have to, that is an unusual action.
Yeah.
And I would tell you, even for people who I'd known for many years and people who I had spent a lot of time with discussing this, 100% of them said it was essentially stupid to do that. And why would anybody do that? And unless I had some absolute legal requirement and was forced to do it, none of them would do it at all. And there's certainly some validity to that. In fact, my wife, in an interview, when a reporter, because this became public, when a reporter asked her, she said, well, I don't mind him being generous. I just wish he hadn't given everything away. And that being said, look, what is my worst day? My worst day is I am a neurosurgeon. That profession pays 99.9% more than almost, anyone in the world makes. It would, first of all, be an insult to everyone if somehow I made a statement that, geez, how horrible, I lost all this money, my life is ruined. That's ridiculous, and it's insulting. Losing every penny, I'm still the luckiest person in the world. I have my health, I have my family, I'm paid huge sums comparatively to most of the people in the world, and in fact, most people in the United States. What is it that I could, with any authenticity, complain about? Absolutely nothing. Now, the one comment I will make, and which is a lesson learned, is that I grew up in poverty, and my family was on public assistance my entire life. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was an invalid. She suffered from depression, attempted suicide multiple times. That's not an ideal situation. But I was blessed to have had some individuals who demonstrated compassion to me and really changed how I viewed the world as a youngster. But one of the burdens I was still left with was I thought that the most important thing was control. Like, I wanted to control everything. I want to control, I'm going to work really hard so I can control how much money I make. I want to control the profession I have. I want to control everything because that's going to give me happiness. And when you're poor, you think that control translates into money. And in some ways, of course, we know that if you have significant sums of money, you do have a lot more freedom and opportunity than those who do not. And that is true. But that being said, I found that for me, that I realized suddenly that it was driving certain types of behavior of mine. And it created in me this thinking that it was money that was most important because that gave me control. And if I had control, that made me happy because it decreased, or so I thought, the possibility of some untoward event or something I did not want to happen. Now, of course, if you have any degree of self-awareness or wisdom, you realize that the concept of control is a chimera. That being said, though, many of us have a delusion, though, and it may even be on a subconscious level, that if we hold on to what we think is this view, it makes it the real thing. And the best thing that ever happened to me actually was losing all that money. And then with conscious intent to take that and throw this incredible amount of money, which I could argue was what I had strived to obtain, my entire life, to take it and throw it out there. What happens is suddenly you're liberated. That thing which you believed was the most important thing to your happiness, you have, with intentionality, thrown away, suddenly makes you realize it was meaningless to begin with. Now, I don't want to imply that I did not have a good time when I was extraordinarily wealthy. And again, I'm still better off than the vast majority of people. But I will have to tell you, giving all that money away has had absolutely no effect on my level of happiness whatsoever. Um, so it actually was a liberating experience.
Wow. Wow, that's great. That's, because so many people in America, especially, that's their dream, right? Is to make the millions, and then they think they'll be happy. And to hear from somebody who's been on both sides of that, you know, in your childhood also, but also, to make it and lose it and then make it back. And that's just great. That's just valuable wisdom. Thank you.
Well, and the thing is, I mean, there was just an interview that I saw with an individual who was part of a group of lottery ticket buyers. They bought as a
Mm.
group, and he was, I think, one of 16. And I think their group of 16 walked away with $450 million, right?
Mm.
And the individual was saying his life is miserable. And it's not to say that, he hasn't bought things that he thought he needed, but it's completely disrupted
Mm.
so many of his interactions in the world. And we look at people who have suddenly been given the gift
Mm.
that they thought they wanted, and it has brought misery.
Mm.
And this has been repeated over and over and over again. And, it's an absolute truism. It is, be careful what you ask for. Right?
Yeah.
Because when you get it, actions can have untoward consequences.
Mm.
And the most important thing each of us can ask for is food, shelter, security, safety for our families. And fundamentally, once you have that, there's not a whole lot of increment in happiness by having more things.
Mm.
And in fact, frankly, one of the things I found is having less things makes me happier.
Wow. That's great advice. I also, I'm so happy you mentioned those individuals who at a very young age changed your life, right? And I love that story that you tell about how you walked into a magic store when you were 13 years old, and this woman taught you mindfulness and positive thinking and visualization techniques that changed your life. And I know there aren't any Stingray bicycles or magic stores around anymore, but let's say a 13-year-old kid is riding his Razor scooter around Stanford and he bumps into you and you take a liking to him. What would you teach or tell him or her to change the trajectory of their life?
Well, there's an interesting book, and I don't know if you've seen it, it's by Adam Grant. It's called Give and Take, and he's a professor at Wharton who's actually has studied this concept in the business world of sort of being extraordinarily generous and how it has an impact actually on your career and your business in a positive way. And getting back to how you opened this discussion where you said, geez, so many of us live these busy lives and we can't do a whole lot more. And I think you're also potentially alluding to the fact that there's a lot of suffering going on and you could be overwhelmed with it because how can I as one person have an impact? And you could translate this into, how could I as this person who's working in this sort of average mundane job, which is low paying, how could I have an impact? Or how could any human being have a significant impact? And, Margaret Mead, I think, made a statement, which I'm going to incorrectly quote, but it was along the lines of any great movement, any great thing that has happened starts with one person. So we know that's to be true. I think that is a truism. I think the other thing is that when you get around, you think about this concept, there's a great African myth or story that says there's a fire in the forest and all the big animals, the elephants and the gorillas and the giraffes and the zebras are all standing on the side of the forest watching the forest burn. They've all run and escaped. And they look up and there's a hummingbird. And the hummingbird is flying from this pond to the center of the forest fire and dropping a drop of water from its beak. And they say to the hummingbird, why are you wasting your time? That's not going to have any impact. And the hummingbird says, I'm only doing what I can do. And each of us has the capacity to do something. Is it going to put out the forest fire, if you will? Is it going to end all suffering? Probably not. But I tell people, regardless of how much money you have, what position you're in, what your circumstances, even a dire one, each of us has the capacity to positively affect at least one person every day. And when you sit there and say, what would I say to somebody? Frankly, you don't necessarily have to say anything. You just have to be available to them to help them. And you have to have intent and think about it in the sense that whatever action you're engaged in, you have to think and look at the other person and say, is there a way I can make their path, their road, their place a little bit easier? And it could be simply as saying hello. It can be opening a door. It could be seeing somebody on the side of the road who's run out of gas to take them to the gas station. All of these are available to us. Now, don't get me wrong. Yes, I do appreciate the fact that there are bad people in the world. Yes, I do appreciate the fact that when you put yourself open and vulnerable like that, tragedy can ensue. But the vast, vast, vast majority of cases, it's not true at all. Not only do people want to do good in general, when you do good, it actually not only benefits somebody, but it incredibly benefits yourself, and it makes you feel good. In fact, I would suggest you, if you think back on those situations where you were in a position where you needed help and you had exhausted every possibility, what happens to each of us when we're in that position? We start sitting there saying, geez, obviously I don't deserve good things to happen to me. This is somehow my fault. I deserve this. There's no God. And then after you beat yourself up, unfortunately, when then somebody comes to your aid, and it could be the most mundane thing, they come to the aid at a time when you need it the most, in a microsecond, your worldview changes. And that's an interesting thing because it tells us some things. One is that acknowledgement that somebody has helped you, and it makes you feel so good and you're so thankful. But it also tells you how these things are inside of you to choose. You know, there's a Stoic philosopher by the name of Epictetus who was a slave, and his statement used to be, or was, that I can control very few things, but the one thing I can absolutely control is how I respond to the events of the day, right? And each of us has the ability to choose how we respond. But getting back to my other point about how somebody being kind to you makes you feel so good, the other thing that you yourself can recall, and I think all of us, is when we've done a simple act for somebody and they were so appreciative and how good it made us feel. And that feeling of deep, deep happiness and goodness, it doesn't stick with you for a second or a minute. It continues with you and ends up oftentimes being something that you can recall years later, and every time you think of it, it gives you this deep feeling of warmth and makes you want to engage again. And if you think about those times, it makes you with intent to go out and try to connect with people and help them. And I have to tell you, pretty much in general, if anyone asks me for anything, I try on every level to assist them. Now, obviously, if somebody says, well, listen, could you give me your bank account? Could you give me your house? No. But it's not to say being foolish, but if you can accommodate somebody's request, it will make you feel better.
Wow. That's, Dr. Doty, you're what I would see as an anomaly, right? Because no, I'm going to explain this because one, you're a man, right? And the Dalai Lama just stated that, biologically he thinks biologically women have a larger capacity for compassion than men do. And then two, you're you're upper class, right? And Dacher Keltner over at The Greater Good has researched and shown that, people in the higher classes tend to have less compassion than people in the lower class. They tend to feel compassion less. And, you're just, it's incredible. I can feel the compassion that you are cultivating, that you have, and just being in that position of a male who's well off now. I know you came from poverty, but well off now, and just the amount that you give to compassion, it warms my heart. It does. It really does.
Well, thank you. That's kind of you. But but this is in some ways a sad thing, right? Because why is it that, if you will, a man wouldn't be that way?
Yeah.
The problem we have in our society, in some ways, is these artificially defined roles that, especially in modern society, prevent men especially from showing their vulnerability. And it's a sad thing, because if you can't be vulnerable, you cannot love. If you can't open your heart, people can't connect with you. If you can't show that you're in pain, they can't comfort you, right? Yet, at the core of our being is a need and a desire, that nurturing and comfort. Well, how do we get around that? And it's funny, because I give talks and I show my own vulnerability. I tell these very painful stories sometimes, and I get moved. And I have never felt that it in any way made me less of a man or showed weakness. And in fact, frankly, it's quite the opposite. If you're able to show your vulnerability in front of a large group of people and say, I am who I am, it allows them to be vulnerable. In fact, in every instance I can recall, when I've been in front of a group of people and given a talk where I've showed my own vulnerability, my own emotion, as soon as I do that, it flows throughout the room, and it allows people to show their own. And in fact, I can't tell you the number of times where, as soon as I've done that, the whole room sort of starts to become teary-eyed or crying. And it's okay, because when that happens too, it allows them to be at their most authentic. And when you're at your most authentic, people can read that and respond to that. And that is the fundamental capacity that we have, which defines our humanity.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's so beautiful. Yeah, so I want to switch shoes with you real quick. Not because I want to be a neuroscientist at Stanford, but let's say you were in my shoes and you were in charge of the Compassionate Men's interview series. Who would you pick to interview, and why?
Well, certainly I don't think there's any question that probably in the world at this moment in time, there are very few icons of compassion in the sense of people who by their very action exemplify compassion. Certainly the Dalai Lama is one of those people. But he's, of course, been interviewed innumerable times, and he sticks to message. But the great thing about him, and I can tell you, having been in his presence many times, the reason he is so attractive to so many people is in his presence, and this gets back to our earlier point, in his presence, you are unconditionally loved, and there's no reason to put on any pretense about anything. You don't have to have a big name. You don't have to have accomplished a great deal by some arbitrary standard. All you have to do is to show your heart and be there. And you feel this unconditional love surrounds you, and it is so liberating. The problem in our society today is, and we're talking about vulnerability, is so many of us feel we have to put this shield up to all of those around us to show that we're accomplished, that we're not suffering, that we have our act together, that things work out for us, and that we're just so smart, instead of acknowledging that we are fragile, frail, vulnerable people who are just doing the best we can. And it's okay to be that way. And when you do that and you lay yourself like that, in general, people don't want to hurt you. They want to love you. They want to embrace you. They want to care for you. And it's just such a truism and reality. That's what we as humans are made for. It's just that people don't believe it. You know, it's like somehow they have been brainwashed to think, especially in the context of males, that you have to be this macho guy and you have to be the provider, breadwinner, and that's what defines here humanity, and that's what defines being a real man in our society, and it's not at all. It's completely the opposite. But what happened in each of these parts of our evolution is we've created a paradigm that was satisfactory and worked to allow our survival by creating identities which are not necessarily for each person that which allows them to best thrive and flourish. And so as women have stepped out of their traditional roles to demand different responsibilities and equality, what it has done is actually it's allowed men to potentially see themselves in a different role. And this is in some ways becoming a more compassionate man. And what it's done is it has created an environment which I think is a new paradigm for flourishing, where you get rid of these arbitrary roles that has historically been defined, which create separation oftentimes, to look at a different place where we recognize the connection between all of us and our interdependence, and how we should have freedom to be in any role which best fits who we are as people. That allows us to best flourish and thrive. And it is by being compassionate and recognizing that people are being put into these situations which causes suffering. And how do we create then that environment to allow them to flourish and thrive? And that's by releasing them, if you will. And in fact, getting back to some of the things we're talking about, there's a wonderful poem by a lady by the name of Nancy Smith, who was a feminist in the 70s. And it was a response to how women were feeling in desiring to be in this different role, but actually it's how men feel too. And it's called, it's been modified, but it's not, and I'm going to tell you the modified version, but it's for every girl, and it goes, for every girl who is tired of appearing weak when she is strong, there is a boy who appears strong but feels vulnerable. For every girl who is tired of being told or she is oversensitive, there's a boy who fears showing his feelings and crying. For every boy who feels that the only way he can demonstrate his masculinity is through competition, there's a girl who is tired of being told she is not feminine when she tries to compete. And for every boy who feels that he must appear as if he knows everything, there's a girl who is tired of people telling her, or people not trusting her intelligence. And for every woman, or excuse me, for every girl who has taken the first step towards her own liberation, there is a boy who now sees the path to freedom.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I love the way it ties together with when you actually are released from that or freed from that, and you can actually self-actualize, you actually make a path for others to do the same, right? And
Exactly.
you
Yeah, because and whether we can use the gay lesbian movement, which has made so much progress in the last several, whether it's feminism itself, whether it's religious liberation, in fact, or cultural liberation. I mean, it allows people to be who they really are and not feel as if they're constrained by these things. Now, obviously, we have to keep in mind that, if somebody wants to murder everybody,
yeah, yeah,
but in the context of thinking how, for most people, what it is to live an authentic life, it's not having these artificial constraints. Imagine if you or I were in a position where, let's say, I love some activity and it's very meaningful to me, and in fact, in some ways, it defines who I am, and yet I've been raised or forced to live in a society that crushes that and implies it has no value and there's no dignity in doing that or being that way. I mean, what more can you ask to destroy the human spirit, right? And when you destroy the human spirit, there's nothing. Either the person is destroyed, or what they do is they act out in a way which is not beneficial for anyone.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a blueprint for, self-actualization, world peace, equality. We just need to spread that message.
Just to make one more comment, I give a talk sometimes, and whether we're talking about war, whether we're talking about global warming, whether we're talking about poverty, whether we're talking about ecological destruction, these are not existential problems. These are problems, if you will, of the human heart. And I say that in the following context. Every one of us has, if you will, wounds of the heart. We all have some events that have happened, or someone who's perpetrated something that has hurt us and caused us pain. For most of us, it's superficial, it heals, and we're able to go on. The problem is that for some people, these wounds are deep, and they don't heal, and they cause pain. And when you have that type of pain that has not been allowed to heal, or you haven't been given the tools to allow it to heal, or, if you will, the medicine to allow it to heal, and you're in pain, then you do actions as a response to that pain. And that's why there's so much human suffering. Because when an individual is suffering, he doesn't have clarity of mind to love. Right? And in fact, he tries to decrease the pain oftentimes by causing pain to others to distract him, or doing actions which are negative, believing that somehow that's going to make him feel better. And it doesn't, And then, we, of course, also have a subset of people who, on one level, very much want to have this vessel of emptiness that sits with us filled. Now, if you take the path of self-awareness and make the effort to, let's say, learn wisdom traditions and garner insight, you fill that so that, in fact, it's overflowing, and it overflows with love and care and concern for others. But sometimes people, they keep trying to fill it with something that offers no sustenance and no nutrition or nourishment, and therefore it's always empty and it's hungry. In Tibetan mythology, of course, there's this idea of the hungry ghost, where it has this thin throat, and you're trying to stuff it full, yet it never gets enough food. And that's the problem for many people, too, is, how do you give it the sustenance? How do you give it the nourishment to allow it to grow? How do you give them the medicine to heal these wounds that cause them so much pain and cause these negative actions or negative afflictions of emotion? And it's hard. And that's why, though, if you think that by caring and being compassionate on every level is going to make people love you too, you're also chasing a chimera. You know, I had a situation recently where an individual, he sent me a note talking about the hypocrisy of certain people while they're, and basically what he's saying is, you know, my compassion is better. And this person's a hypocrite because, you know, they say they're doing this, but they're, and, you know, my statement to him was, you are under an ego delusion here. Compassion doesn't have judgment or comment. Compassion is embracing another and whatever they're suffering from, embracing them and trying to relieve that suffering. In no way is there a discussion about comment, judgment, or that I'm somehow better than you. Because the only way you can really connect with somebody, and this is another problem, is you have to look at them eye to eye.
So I know you're busy, Dr. Doty,
Yeah.
and we'll wrap up. Let me just give you, I mean, let me just give you a chance to say, is there anything else that you wanted to mention that you're doing presently or you're planning presently in regards to cultivating compassion? I don't know if you want to mention your, you know, the World Compassion, what is it called? The initiative, the Global Compassion Initiative, or is there anything else that you wanted to mention in terms of what you're doing in terms of cultivating compassion?
Well, you know, while that information is available, if somebody wants to look it up on websites associated with me, that's wonderful. But, you know, really the only thing from my own perspective that I would like to finish with is to get back to this earlier point, which is each of us every day has the capacity to make one individual's life better. And if you have that as your mantra every day, that will give you an immense amount of sustenance that will propel you to a better place in your own life from a mental perspective, from a health perspective, and from a self-actualization perspective.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Doty, for taking time out of your
Sure.
busy schedule. I know, I know you're a neurosurgeon. I also want to thank you for all you do to cultivate compassion around the world, and from C-Care to all your talks and to just all the organizations and that you participate in to bring compassion around the world. If anyone would like to find out more information about Dr. Doty, you can check the webpage www.ccare.stanford.edu. That's www.ccare.stanford.edu. I just want to say one thing in closing. I've been to a Dalai Lama talk before, but I've never been, right in his presence, Dr. Doty. But the way you described how just being in the presence of someone who is open to compassion, open-hearted like that, changes the people around him. I have to say that, I feel, just in this interview, I feel your compassion. I feel more compassionate myself. I feel my heart is open a bit, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I appreciate it.
Thank
Take care.
you today.
See you.